Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Kendall Phillips. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Communication and Rhetorical Studies here at Syracuse University, and along with my friend, Dr. Marcel Haddix, a co-director of the Lender Center for Social Justice. I want to begin this morning by acknowledging with respect the Onondaga Nation, fire keepers of the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous people on whose ancestral lands Syracuse University now stands. And I'm pleased to welcome you all to the second day of our Lender Conversation on Policed Bodies, a community conversation on race, disability, and justice. We're deeply appreciative of the scholars, advocates, and teachers who joined with us yesterday and shared their insights and proposals. For those who were able to attend yesterday's session, you witnessed some important, provocative, and profound conversations about the traumatic consequences of police violence against Black, Brown, Indigenous, disabled, trans, and queer people in our communities. You also witnessed strong arguments in favor of radically transforming the conceptions and practices of public safety in our communities and in our schools. I use the term witnessing here intentionally, because to witness is not simply to see pain and injustice, but to bear responsibility for it. And I would add that those who, like me, were born with unearned privileges, we must also be prepared to listen, to be accountable, and to act. The Lender Conversations are designed to create this kind of witnessing space, a place to learn from the bravery and wisdom of those who are involved in national and global fights for justice, and a place to learn from the brave advocates and thoughtful activists who are pushing for justice right here in our local communities. This morning, we will begin with a community conversation among Syracuse residents, advocates, and community leaders about policing, race, and disability in our neighborhoods and in our schools. Then at about 11:15 or so, we will continue our conversation in 3 breakout rooms. One room will focus on policing in our communities. The second room will focus on policing in our schools. And there'll be a third room that will focus on the very necessary space of healing and self-care with radical breathing, writing meditations, and other practices. So at the end of the opening panel, you'll be able to select which room you want to join. I'll pop back on the screen to help explain how that process will work. And then after about 45 minutes, a breakout discussion will bring everybody back together for a brief closing. Finally, as a reminder, if you do not want to be seen, please be sure to turn your camera off. This is being recorded. And it will be helpful if everyone can just remain on mute when not speaking. Also, please let us know through the chat function if you would like ASL in your breakout room. Now, to begin our panel discussion, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Beth Myers, the Lawrence B. Tayshoff Assistant Professor of Inclusive Education, Executive Director of the Tayshoff Center for Inclusive Higher Education, and Assistant Director of the Center for Disability Inclusion here at Syracuse University. She is also a faculty member in the Department of Teaching and Leadership and author of Autobiography on the Spectrum, Disrupting the Autism Narrative from Teachers College Press. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Myers to your screens.
Thank you, Kendall. I am so pleased to be here today. Thank you so much. And I'm happy to introduce Yusuf Abdul-Qadir. Yusuf is a lead organizer with the Syracuse Police Accountability and Reform Coalition, a member of the Black Freedom Project, and the 13th Forward campaign to end New York's 13th Amendment exemption to the abolition of slavery. He works at Facebook as a product policy manager. Yusuf is a social commentator who has spoken on an array of racial justice issues. In 2020, he supported the advancement of a national vision in defense of defunding the police. He is also an activist scholar and Afrofuturist whose research sits at the intersection of climate, environmental justice, racial equity, and emerging technology. In 2018, he was appointed as an adjunct faculty at the School of Information Studies at Syracuse University, where he teaches information policy to graduate students. Welcome, Yusuf.
Thank you, Beth, and I really appreciate being here for a second day. This is such an important and prescient conversation. And I'm super excited because I know all the folks who are here on this conversation well and quite deeply, and have a tremendous amount of respect for them. I want to center us before I introduce the panelists in the way that we're going to have a real radical conversation. And as I said yesterday, radical can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, and I'm totally and absolutely embracing the term because we have gone so radically askew from what should be acceptable that in order to get us to any place that looks anywhere somewhat close to normalcy, we need to have a radical shift. We have experienced entirely too many police killings and assault and trauma against Black and Brown communities. And I'm not here, and we're not here to have a conversation about bad apples. There are rotten trees and there are no bad apples. The institution itself is and will continue to bear the rotten fruit that it does because the institution is and has been historically inherently designed to develop these outcomes. And that is the conversation we're having today. I say this because I want to give people the opportunity at 10, 11 in the morning that if this was not the conversation that you were interested in participating in, we will not be offended if you go back to sleep and enjoy your Saturday morning. Totally going to be okay. I will be fine out of the way. We will all continue the discussion because it's got to go. But if you, as Kendall has implored us to do, want to bear responsibility and bear witness to what is happening, then you ought to stay here because this is going to be a tough conversation. It will be a challenging conversation. It will be a righteous conversation, and it is an important conversation. And I'm happy to introduce the folks that will be engaging in that conversation this morning. I'm going to begin with Jimmy Oliver, who is the current director of community engagement for the Syracuse Police Department. In a civilian role, Oliver is responsible for developing, coordinating, and implementing community engagement programming. Jimmy worked at National Boys and Girls Club for over a decade, and in 2018, he returned to his home Syracuse and was appointed Deputy Commissioner of Parks, Recreation, and Youth Programs by Mayor Ben Walsh. There, he oversaw youth and senior programming, recreation, athletics, and led community outreach. Larry Williams is the CEO of Syracuse Community Connections, which provides a network of human services to predominantly African-American residents that are from low-income neighborhoods in Syracuse and across Onondaga County. He was born in Syracuse and has 25 years of educational leadership as a former school administrator, teacher, youth development and programming and community advocate. And Williams was the director of community initiatives for Syracuse Community Connections for 4 years prior to being appointed. Locally, folks know Syracuse Community Connections at the Southwest Community Center, but it is based there and also quite beyond that footprint. Talina Jones is an advocate for families who have children with disabilities. She is the chair of the New York State Early Intervention Coordinating Council, a trainer for the Early Intervention Partners Training Project, and serves on the board of the Central New York chapter of the New York Civil Liberties Union. Her master's research centered on a Black womanist understanding of disability and how that lens might impact the creation of future advocacy programs created for families of color. Twiggy Billue is the president of the Syracuse chapter of the National Action Network, owner of the Hotep Resource Center, longtime community organizer and advocate for our most vulnerable, our children. Twiggy has been married for 34 years and has 3 children. She works at Jubilee Homes of Syracuse as the workforce development coordinator and has resided on Syracuse's South Side since the early 90s. Billue is currently running for Commissioner of Education on the Syracuse City School Board, advocating to work towards racial equity, but she's known for her efforts to uplift children. She believes unity and diversity are one, they exist together. Jessica Elliott is a Syracuse native and currently serves as the director of programs for the Dunbar Association Incorporated, which is the oldest organization in the city that focuses on providing resources to the Black community. Jessica has been an educator for over a decade, previously with the Syracuse City School District, where she authored and taught a humanities-centered African American history course for high school students throughout the district, and currently at Syracuse University. The ultimate goal that she seeks to achieve is to continue the work of those Black women and men who have come before her, ensuring that the young people of the community are both ready and able to create the brightest future that they can imagine. And last and absolutely not least is Yahkeef, as we call him, TJ Davis, who is a data scientist, activist, and entrepreneur. He has been an organizer with BLM Syracuse for several years. During his time as an organizer with BLM Syracuse, he has seen firsthand the impact of the racism, discrimination, and police brutality that regularly occurs in Syracuse. Since last year, he and the rest of the coalition have been fighting for the mayor's administration to implement the People's Agenda for Policing. If you want to look up the People's Agenda for Policing, you can go to spark315.org. That's spark, SPAARC, 315.org. Selfless plug. One of their biggest wins was getting the Common Council to pass the Right to Know Act, among others. As I said, we have a really dynamic and amazing panel. And this conversation is going to be centered in really a more radical approach to understanding how we have to shift the pendulum. But it is important for us to, because as Bell Hooks reminds us, the personal is political. So we want to know what brings people here, right? Like what brings you to this work? And as I go around this round robin of folks, I want to implore us to say we have a lot of people here and we have a lot of rich conversation that we can have. And some of that conversation will be had in the respective breakout rooms later on in the program. And so if we could make these really condensed answers so that we might allow everyone the opportunity to provide a response, and then you can have more rich conversation in the more intimate breakout rooms. And I know no one's going to listen to that prompt, but as I asked the panelists the first question, I want us to remember again to make the personal political. How did you come to doing this work in the community, and what brings you here? What is the personal that made this political for you? I'm going to start in the adverse. I'm going to start with Yahkeef, and then we'll go to Jessica, Yahkeef, Jessica, Twiggy, Talina, Larry, and then Jimmy. So I'll call out everyone's name who needs to go next, if that's difficult for folks, but we'll start with you, Yahkeef.
So for me, honestly, it's just like looking and seeing, knowing that Syracuse can be better, and seeing that I can't just leave the onus on elected officials to do so. So every time I see something, every time I hear something, every time I go by a certain side of town, and I'm like, it has looked worse than it did when I was 10, when I was 12. There has been no improvement in my entire lifetime. So that's really what drives me. And then seeing things play out nationally, which I know are also still occurring here in Syracuse. So that's what does it for me.
Thank you. Jessica.
Good morning, everyone. So I think when I think about the personal being political, I think about my children, those that I gave birth to and those that I've taught. I have so many babies in the city of Syracuse. It's really not funny at this point. But I think about them and I think about their futures. I think about how they need to feel a sense of freedom and a sense of peace in order to be able to cultivate and create this space of Afrofuturism beyond their wildest dreams. My sons are very young. My sons are 8 and 5 years old. And to have very tough conversations with them about what happens locally, about what happens nationally, it's always disheartening, right? But I understand that the work for me looks like me preparing them to stand strong in who they are, to affirm who they are, and to really, really demand a better future from all of those who are in position to set the stage and the foundation for them to be able to create it. So for me, again, the personal is definitely political because we're talking about the children who I love and I nurture, those that I birth and those that I do not birth, but I will take care of with my own body.
Thank you. I have already so many thoughts but a good moderator moderates and doesn't necessarily editorialize. So I'm going to go to Twiggy.
Good morning, everyone. Jessica, you kind of put the nail on it for me. So it is the personal that became political, right? So the birth of my two of my children, one was fine, and I really didn't notice anything. The second two boys, Black boys, became very difficult births, very difficult things where I was told that they needed to be aborted because of spina bifida and other things. And I have two very healthy men with some of the best character you'll ever want to meet in the city of Syracuse. One co-hosted or co-leaded Rebirth Syracuse. You might have seen him. And to be told that they needed to be aborted kind of made me delve into patients' rights, patient stuff, calling my mother who worked at the National Institute of Health, becoming I'm a research-oriented person by nature, so I started to research rights and responsibility. The second thing that happened was when they were determined to have disabilities, learning disabilities in school. And it wasn't an easy task. So I had two situations where the people that I was supposed to trust to help me and help my children said that one child would not earn more than a D, would never graduate, would only graduate with a IEP diploma. They both graduated with Regents diplomas. By the way, but those two things I think brought the activist organizer out of me in such a way because I didn't understand how I could have some of the best insurance, not public aid, the best insurance, and still be treated in so many different areas as if I didn't matter, if my children didn't matter. Even in education, my son had a speech impediment, and it was years before we found a teacher that realized that he wasn't going to grow out of it, that he needed help. But everyone else made it normal. They normalized the abnormal. And when abnormal continues to be made normal, that's what makes me act. So that's part of the reason why I am who I am today and I do this work. The third thing I'll say is that there was a Rainbow Coalition with Jesse Jackson running for president, something that first time it ever happened in my lifetime. I lived in DC, so it engaged me to take on those issues that we thought were too big for us to take on, galvanize groups of people that had the same interest and do the work.
Thank you, Twiggy. Again, a lot of comments that are coming through my mind, but I'm gonna respectfully move on to Talina.
So it's always interesting for me because when I say to people that I'm from Brooklyn, but I live here in Syracuse, I chose Syracuse. I chose Syracuse because it was a space and a place that upon research, I realized had the supports and services for a child with Down syndrome and a school district that was connected to a university, SU, for whom their teacher prep program was created and supported students with disabilities. Upon moving here, early childhood was one thing, right? This belief in inclusion was one thing in his early years. When we got to middle school and high school, and Jessica knows this because he went to Nottingham and he still is in Nottingham, he's entering into his senior year, it became more of a question of how do I continue to advocate for him and let people know that he belongs? And that's the question, this belonging. Like, he belongs here and this inclusive space. And so it has maintained my critical understanding of what does education mean for all students. And as I said yesterday, and I'll say it again today, if we advocate for oppressed people, then we do well by other people. I remember in his early childhood education, just putting up a schedule in kindergarten helped so many other students who didn't know when the bell was going to ring next. But because he had it as part of his IEP, it ended up helping multiple other children, right? And so those became the kinds of things that I began to see And that's the reason why I continue to advocate. So the birth of my son is the thing that literally made me reflect on who was in my community. Because if you would have asked me before he was born, if I knew people with disabilities, I might have told you no. Meanwhile, I have a whole godmother whose sister had cerebral palsy. But because during the Astoria project day, they just brought her downstairs in a wheelchair and she was outside, right? Like, I didn't see it in that way of understanding what we understand disability to be, because she was just being. Yeah. And so I had to reflect then on the man who walked to the C train every day with a suitcase and his brown suit, but never got on the train. He would walk back to his house after he went downstairs and went to the train. But he did that every single day. But he was just the man in the brown suit. So these are the kinds of things in which, when you start to talk about community engagement and community interaction, when you have a child with a disability, that all of a sudden your eyes open in these types of ways and you get to look around at everything else that's going on, and then you tap in and all of a sudden everything bell hooks, right? The personal becomes the political. Is he getting service? That becomes my question now. Like, right? Like, who's helping him? Who was helping my godmommy's family? Who was helping my cousin who has a daughter with cerebral palsy? Like, I had to say to her, I'm sorry later on, once I had him, because we didn't know how to get her services and supports in the early years. And those kinds of things are the things that as families, even though we do just because we naturally do, we are not always supportive, but we can help them get support if we have access. And I think that's the moment of community engagement. It's the moment, it's the reason why when you say I'm the chair of the Early Intervention Coordinating Council, I decided to go to a state level understanding of it, because even though I live in Syracuse, I wanted to impact folks who live in East New York, Brooklyn. And so I knew I had to think about something statewide. And so this continual work is a thing where I think all of our communities, especially our communities of color, all communities of oppressed peoples, we need to think about like what the stories of families are. When we do that, we can move the grid. So that's my commitment.
Thank you. And I don't hold it against Lana that she's from Brooklyn, being from the Bronx. It's absolutely not her
Shut
fault.
up, Yusuf.
We cannot hold it against her. But we do want to make sure that we give folks a chance to talk here beyond our borough rivalry. So Larry, just want to ask you the same question. What brings you to this work? What was the personal that became political for you?
Good morning, everyone. I'll try to be brief, and let me just first say that I absolutely am thankful to be with the panelists as well as all the folks that are on this morning. For me, as I think about it, as for you, I was born into this. And I think we all, to a degree, if you're a person of color, you're born into, even if you're not being political. For me, I was born 1958 in the projects known as Pioneer Homes. Got a chance early on to see exactly what marginalization for people of color meant at an early age. Watching them build 81 to divide a city, building the Eiffel Tower, which is Syracuse University, and seeing that all sort of sort of arose and being provided in the background, early on, you understood this whole notion of almost them versus us. And even in their meaningful, intentional way, provided the basis of marginalization for people of color. And so out of that, you know, just continue to, you know, obviously going off to school, coming back, I have always had a deep commitment to community. And maybe later on in the breakout sessions, we'll talk about communities versus neighborhoods, because I do think that there is a distinct difference. Even as you go around in this Syracuse community, you'll see clearly Strathmore is a neighborhood. You'll see clearly on the north side, they label themselves neighborhoods. And even in the best meaningful, intentional way, in certain circles, we talk about bettering the city. Young Mr. Davis was a perfect example of saying, and I've been around for a long time, of, you know, I live in the 13205 zip code, proud of it. You know, my neighbor is Twiggy, and nothing seems to ever change, right? As a matter of fact, they seem to get worse. And no matter what the advocacy is, marginalization is not a theory for us, it's a practice. And unfortunately, what happens in our community is we need to constantly be advocates, because unfortunately, on the other side, in meaningful, intentional ways, there are adversaries that don't necessarily work on our behalf. So we constantly have to become our own advocates. And so for me, it was a matter of being born into this, understanding, recognizing the place, raising 3 beautiful children right here on the South Side. They all went to public schools. You know, wonderful wife, obviously, the folks know that she's an educator, committed to this. And I think that we all have a certain commitment to what we do and to what we provide, particularly in the city of Syracuse. I know that when we get into the breakout sessions, probably as yesterday, people will talk about the poverty, they'll talk about the education, but really at the core of that, we ask why? Why in 2021 are we still having the same conversations within our communities of color? And so I'm going to get off my, you know, lately we've had these discussions with my colleagues and other EDs talking about race, you know, race relations and, you know, anti-racism. Until I can see something different, I don't necessarily need to be in those discussions. Now, I understand them, but for me, it's not the theory, it's about the practice. And so, you know, not getting off a tangent, but again, I'm committed to this, as I think, you know, a lot of folks are. And, you know, it's for me, it's lifelong. As an educator, it's lifelong. So I'm constantly learning. I understand that you never fully, I'm still arriving, because we never have fully arrived. We hadn't gotten there yet. So that's my involvement.
Thank you, Larry. And I appreciate what you just said. And I want to make clear for those watching and listening, we're actually not going to have that conversation. We're not going to objectify the community. We're not going to do that here. Many other people may want to do that, but we're not going to objectify the community. We're actually going to get at the heart of the questions that are worthy of our inquiry. We're not going to talk about personal responsibility. We're not going to talk about Black on Black crime. That doesn't exist. It's not a thing. It's a construct that's made to continually victimize and dehumanize Black people. So we are not having that conversation. What we are going to do is, I think, a part of the reason why we had the question about what brings you here, what is the personal became political, is because we're going to humanize people's experiences so that we can talk about how adversely obtuse and absurd it is that we, as a society, I don't mean as Black people, but as a society, have accepted this normative reality. So I want to be clear, because I am quite unapologetic about being explicit about what we are here for. We're not having that conversation. But Jimmy, you are the last person to come to this piece, and I just want to give you a chance before we move on to the next question to also answer, what was the personal for you that became political that mobilized you to the role that you currently have today?
Good morning. Thank you, everybody, for having me here today. What I would say is it started in my elementary school at 900 South Geddes Street, Delaware School, where I too was labeled as a kid with a learning disability in math and reading and written expressions because I had a behavioral problem. Fortunately enough, I had individuals in my school who saw beyond that. There had to be something else that was driving me to be this particular way. And they had to expose me to things that they had to expose me to things that I needed to see differently than what I was seeing when I was home. And they advocated for me. And then in return, they showed me how to advocate for myself and how to advocate, for my community. Whether it was going to an alternative school, whether it was meeting in front of the superintendent of schools at 9 years old, getting ready to get expelled. They had to show me something different. And then my movement to the Boys and Girls Clubs of Syracuse, where I wanted to emulate the leaders that I had in my elementary school and the folks that I had in my community. I wanted then to become an advocate and a mentor for the young people in the city of Syracuse, whether it was being in, advanced classes, having the opportunity to experience things outside of Syracuse so that you can know that the world is bigger than Syracuse, that those things are possible. Whether it was, seeing my brothers incarcerated, beaten up by the police, trying to find a job after being incarcerated, and trying to find ways to navigate and speak on those things. And then leaving the city of Syracuse and moving to Virginia, Richmond, Virginia, and Lynchburg, Virginia, where things are a lot different than I was experienced up here in the city of Syracuse. And I think the things that we're going to talk about here today down south, they're up in your face. And one of the things that I want to bring to my role in the police department and serve in this community in a different capacity is using some of those tools that we used in Virginia to get, not only the folks who need us the most, but the folks who are in the middle and the folks who are well off to come in the same room and have conversations about how to begin to use action to make these things possible. And to hold individuals, whether they're elected officials or whether they're whomever they are, hold their feet to the fire and continue to hold their feet to the fire until we get what we want. Lastly, I would say we as a community, African American and Brown community, we need to begin to unite together, build a coalition where we are strong, we have a strong foundation. We're willing to, even if we disagree on different perspectives on how to get there, we have to continue to stand together, united, and push forward our cause. And if we're able to do that, then we will start to see the needle move forward. But we have to keep folks' feet to the fire. Our youth said it this summer as they were walking the streets, 40 days, 40 nights. They made their demands. I heard them. I know the city of Syracuse, a lot of folks on this call heard them. So now, how are we going to make sure that those things are done in an intentional way and make sure that we follow through with what we stand on and what they have asked us to do? So I look forward to having this conversation today with everybody. Again, I appreciate being here. But let's, we can talk, but let's start putting actions behind our words and building a coalition where we hold individuals accountable for what we need and want. Thank you.
Excellent. So you got a flavor of who the folks are here today. And man, I can tell you the mind is percolating with 500 questions that are not on this list. And I'm definitely going to diverge from it from time to time because I think it's important to do so. I want to comment before I go into the first question, because Larry said something that really struck a chord that I think is important to uplift. Right? He said that as Black people, we were born into this, right? And it's important to clarify for folks that being Black, our endurance and our existence is an act of radicalism, right? Like existing is a thing. That is our resistance, that we are still here despite everything that has been pit against us. And it's important to understand that socially these things have been constructed and continue to be constructed and manifested. They're not haphazard, they're not accidental. And it's why we begin the second question with the premise of what is policing as an institution versus individual policing officers or actors, etc. Because when we question what are the challenges to changing the institution, specifically in the city of Syracuse, the answer becomes a different type of answer when you look at it from the lens of, well, if this particular officer were off the force, then we won't have this problem. When actually that's not the answer to the question. So if anyone's going to say that, I'm going to challenge you, I'm probably going to stop you, I'm going to push back on you. It is endemic in the institution because the institution historically, this is not my opinion, this is like the police museum, right? The National Law Enforcement Museum. Policing as an institution was born out of slave catching, right? It was born out of the maintenance of slavery. It was born to reinforce Black codes. It was born after the passage of the 13th Amendment. The exemption to the 13th Amendment abolishes slavery except when you're convicted of a crime. So therefore you create a bunch of crimes to then criminalize Black and police Black bodies, to bring them back into that station, to break up social justice movements that are fighting for liberation, whether liberation for Black people, Indigenous people, other brown people, environmental justice activists who met John Lewis across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the police, right? So this is the institution. It's not an afterthought. It is the thing. So what are the challenges that we have in the city of Syracuse to changing that thing? And I'm going to ask also, in addition to that, can it actually even be changed, right? Like, is that even a possibility? So I want to start with Jimmy, just because you were the last person to go. And I don't put this on you as the representative from the city, but you got that job, brother. So I want to give you a chance to do that. And I'm quite confident that you may have some who agree and perhaps those who will staunchly disagree. And I'm going to let you go first.
Okay. What I would say, just in my short term, this is not gonna change overnight. It didn't happen overnight. But what I would say is that we have had conversations, we got our marching orders, and how do we begin to move in that direction? And we have to be able to put the institution, because I'm hearing that from the community. I'm also hearing it from officers about how the institution needs to change. But we have to be willing to make some tough decisions. And we're not going to make everyone happy, but we have to begin to look at the process of how we're hiring officers. And I do believe in my short period of time that the chief is making strides to do that. He's having individuals from outside the city give recommendations on that process. He's putting community folks on the a part of the hiring process where the community can come in and ask questions of the individuals that we're going to move into that process. We're looking at ways to look at the dissent decree document. We're looking at the way of section 57, I believe it is. And we're trying. And I know that may not be the answer to your question, but we have to begin to put some different mindsets and different perspectives on what that whole change in the institution looks like.
Thank you. I want to go to, I'm going to go to Yahkeef in a moment, but I think it's important to kind of frame the question that I'm going to ask him, because Jimmy, you mentioned that folks marched this summer or last summer and organized and came up with a list of demands and the need for people to hold their elected officials accountable to build community. And I think it's important to clarify that there actually is a group that has done research, written legislation, provided advocacy, has been attempting to hold the administration accountable. But it quite seemingly feels that it's been falling on deaf ears. And I want to put this juxtaposed to a request that we got yesterday, folks on this call even, from Spectrum News, which was about Syracuse Police Benevolent Association, asking us to comment. Like, this is the conversation about police bodies, right? This is the conversation about the challenging issues we have in policing. And we were requested to respond to the police union, as if like that's the conversation. But it made me beg the question, and I'm going to direct us to TJ, because after you've been involved in organizing and advocating, the police union has a tremendous amount of power. It's quite frankly almost as if they run the city government, to be frank. So I wanted to get your thoughts, TJ, because you've been in the bowel of the belly of the beast, as they say. You've been deeply involved in the organizing and advocacy. You've been calling out those demands. You're the youngest person here. So I think all of those things are checked off with you. What are your thoughts about the challenges that have to change? And is the administration doing what they have to do? Are they holding themselves to account? I suppose that they do want change, but wanting change and wanting the right change can oftentimes be two very different things. And what is the power that the union holds in this piece? Those were a lot of questions, but I just wanted to toss it over to you.
Yeah. So I think in terms of what I think are the biggest obstacles to meaningful change around both safety and just general equity in Syracuse, I really think it comes down to like some slim portion of it is like ignorance, right? So the people who we have elected, some who may mean well, generally do not know that there is thousands of articles, thousands of research, data points that show, hey, if you want to improve the poverty in the community, this is what you do. This is what you don't do. You invest in more resources. You invest in the actual community. You increase access to jobs. You join a universal basic income experiment. These are things you do that improve both the safety and health and well-being of a community. Not, oh, let's double down on riot gear. Let's double down on getting tanks and stuff. Like, that's not, like, you would know that. So part of it is just general ignorance, right? I'll give it that. And then the other part is just a general disinterest. Some of it is definitely racism. Some of it is just people saying, I don't care about nobody else but myself. And, you know, I'm elected into this position for my ego. Some of it is that. But it's really only those two things. It's either ignorance or ill intentions. That's it. That's it, because all of the information exists currently. It can be found with a simple Google search that says, hey, our community is going through this. How can I, as an elected official that is supposed to be an intelligent embodiment of what the community wishes, actually do something effective to help them in any way? So my take is it's really those two things. And as far as the city, I think the city has demonstrated both ignorance and ill will by them doing explicit things like saying, hey, was it Ithaca? We saw that you did the change, and we saw that you proposed this plan to dramatically and fundamentally change the way I do public safety and policing. Hey, officers, if you're upset with reform, come to SPD. So we've seen that. We've heard the chief say, oh, despite the community's calls for a citizen review board that has the power to actually hold officers accountable and dole out discipline when they sustain their findings, we heard the chief say, no, that'll never happen with me, right? We've heard that. So it's both ignorance and an intentional disregard, disinterest in doing what has been asked and what has been shown and proven with evidence to be beneficial to the community.
Talina, I see your hand raised. I feel like I'm the teacher in the classroom here today. Students, we're going to have Ms. Jones answer this question. Talina, I want to give you a chance, and then I'm going to go to Larry, Twiggy, and then Jessica, you'll be the last one.
I was getting ready to say, literally everybody at SU who's ever had me in my class knows that when I start getting into it, I'm like, I want to say something, but I don't want to say something because it's going to be a whole thing. But Yahkeef, I hear you. You know, I think you are a dope advocate, right? But I don't have a lot of space for ignorance anymore. Not in the world of 2021 and Google and access to research and folks who are in administrations and in the era of data points. Like, I don't have that. I don't have that space for that anymore. Like, it's like at this point, what are we actually talking about? What is keeping you from doing that, right? And truth be told is that it's usually systems or the union in this space. Now, mind you, my mom might be on this call and she will probably be like, what do you mean the union? I'm not saying that union should be, right, non-existing. What I'm saying is that union bosses sit in places when you guys don't even know for whom you're protected by, might make these really kind of horrible decisions, are sitting in spaces and having conversations that don't work for everybody else. Because if we think about the teachers union, if you're 3 years in and unions are making decisions and you're not protected yet, it's a whole other point of contention. So we're not there because we're talking about police bodies. But I think when we talk about police bodies, I really love the name of this talk because we're talking about policed bodies. Like, the ill intention comes from, Yahkeef, what you talked about. Like, where does it come from, right? That long history of enslaved bodies. Yusuf, you talked about this too, like this long history of just out of enslavement becomes this moment where we're still trying to figure out how to regulate and confiscate your notion of freedom, your notion of liberation, and how do we continue with the 13th Amendment? And that is how that like clause in the 13th Amendment still remains the same, so that when you go to jail multiple times, you still lose your freedom over and over again. And so there is this notion of order and this notion of power that we can't lose sight of as we think about freedom and liberation, because you can't get there when that is literally the system that you're involved in and the kinds of things that people get sent to jail for. Like, there are these mishaps, these things that white young men, white young women get to experience, right? They get to experience it, but we get jailed for it, right? And so those are like, right, I could get high and have an experience. I'm selling you the drug, and I might be a Mr. Davis, and I'm underneath the jail. Like, right? Like, that's the difference. That's what we're essentially talking about. So when we're talking about ill intent, it's this notion, even though people like to use implicit and explicit bias, I hear all of that conversation, but at the end of the day, we're still talking about white supremacist, patriarchal, ableist thinking. Because the truth be told, and sexist, right? Because the truth be told is how we police girls' bodies are different from how we police boys' bodies. Who we think is supposed to go to jail and who is not supposed to go to jail is based on those things. And then even when we engage with law enforcement for the carceral system, because I'm no longer calling it the criminal justice system, and I said this yesterday, that at the end of the day, the ill intention, whether you think you have an ill intention, is so deeply embedded that you have to do a lot of work to unearth that. And if there's no opportunity for us to do that, then we're not going to ever move forward. But I will say to the Black and Brown community that at some point we also need to be reflective on ourselves about how we also think about the ways in which we feel about the police system when we can't reimagine a justice system without the police. We need to reimagine a justice system without the police. On period.
Thank you. And I would probably also say we need to actually imagine a justice system without police, because we haven't even gotten to the point where we could even imagine it to reimagine.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Larry, I want to give you a chance. You run an amazing agency that does a lot of great work that deals with a number of kind of wraparound services, and want to give you a chance about what do you see are the barriers and impediments to change, and specifically in Syracuse.
I actually want to piggyback off of Mr. Davis and Ms. Jones, who really sort of built the frame for the discussion around police bodies. I do like the title. And Talina said, there's no such thing as criminal justice, but I'll say, actually, the criminal justice really is about just us, right? And police bodies really is code for just us. I'll answer the question by just sort of looking at police as really sort of a militaristic organization that is garnered in a status quo that operates from their own manifesto, right? And I think that we see that not just in this community, but communities across, this country. So it is it's sort of a open-ended question that people of color is perplexed, because we haven't seen anything different. We haven't seen any changes. And even though there is data out there, I represent an agency for which, again, Black and brown people with some of the programs that we have are constantly talking about, the approach of police. And so I think Yusuf mentioned it, even in the conversation with the new, I believe is the president of the Police Benevolent Association, even in the context of what he was saying. So he premised it by saying, we want to hire more people, but look at them, look at what they're doing outside, right? So I'm saying, well, who the hell is them, right? And so, Mr. Oliver talked about recruitment. I know for a fact, and I know this has probably happened to Ms. Billue, several quality young men in this community who have tried and who wanted to become police, but the circumstances that surround their qualifications somehow is different. And so there's a different playbook of acceptance for even getting Black and brown people. So do we really want to change policing, the governance of policing, and who is actually qualified to police? Or do we want to still use that manifesto by saying our communities really is not about policing, it's about they need to be policed, right? It comes from this framework, they need to be policed because it comes out of a mindset of criminality rather than civil, citizenship. So that is a daily frustration. It is a daily challenge. When you're representing an organization, and not just mine, I'm quite sure there are many. We talk about even with those young men and women who suffer from certain disabilities in school, right? And so they're not even given the opportunity. So we're criminalized before we're given the opportunity to be citizens, right? So how do we actually change the system when the manifesto and the playbook is constantly about looking at guilt before they take a look at giving the opportunity to be innocent? So I do agree. It's about being intent. I don't think that they really want to take a look at the data. I think that is sort of the status quo. I think as a community of color, we certainly can imagine a community or communities about self-governance, about self-policing, and without the police. But politically, I'm quite sure that the police need to exist because we need to be contained, plain and simple, right? Sort of stay in our own in places. So it is quite a challenge every day. I certainly do believe in understanding police, but I'm always confused about really the role of the police when they're operating on behalf of my citizenship, or when am I the enemy number one? Because as a Black man, I'm always the enemy. And so therefore, if I'm always labeled the enemy, where am I going to get fair and equality and justice? Or is it the policing just for us? So I grapple with that every day and appreciate the comments that I think Mr. Davis and Ms. Jones made earlier.
Some very, very, very rich content here. And I just want to emphasize 2 points before I go to Twiggy. Talina, you mentioned regulate and confiscate, right, within the context of the 13th Amendment. And again, not everyone knows about the 13th Amendment, so I'm just going to say this and name it before I go to Twiggy. The 13th Amendment is what abolished slavery in the US, right? It says slavery in the United States, or forced labor, is abolished except, right? And that's the exemption piece, when you are convicted of a crime, right? And so the manifestation of keeping people enslaved was facilitated by this clause that every state in the country, including New York State, have in their state constitution. So it's totally legal in New York State to have forced labor. And in fact, if you remember last year during COVID, when it first came out, there was a shortage of hand sanitizer, right? And somehow we were able to manufacture this hand sanitizer. Who was manufacturing this hand sanitizer? Prisoners across New York State, right? And it's important to understand the ecosystem that connects the forced labor by making sure we're going to go downstate and arrest Black and brown folks so that rural communities can have jobs, right? And therefore we can't shut down the prisons, because then how are we going to have jobs in Attica? There's legitimately a furniture brand called the Attica Collection that are the furniture supplied to almost all of the schools and state institutions, whether it's SUNY or CUNY or Syracuse City School District, etc. So the state is legitimately profiting. This is how obtuse this is. The state is profiting off of legalized slavery in 2021. And so to bring that back to the
But
inquiry that we're
Yusuf,
at here.
I don't
Oh,
just.
sorry, I gotta cut you because we got
No,
a
go
little bit
ahead.
of time
Mhm.
and we got 2 more people. I do want to let you bring that up when we get to the subgroup, because the other strain that brings in is Larry's point about being enemy number one and militaristic, right? Because the two go hand in hand. And you this summer, Twiggy, raised a question and an issue that Carol Baum talks about with respect to this warrior cop mentality. And I want to uplift Carol because she uses this language pretty clearly, where she says they use the language, the speech, the weaponry, the mentality of war, right? And they look at our communities as if they are the enemy, right? So how could you change that when the community is the enemy, right? Like the job is to get the enemy, confiscate the enemy, put the enemy in the prison so that you can profit off of the enemy's enslavement. So what is the barrier? Because the irony is a year later, the administration is actually increasing the number of militarized equipment and technology they're having, despite the moment that we find ourselves in, where we're asking us these harsh questions, where we've seen the disparity between the insurrection and white folks literally storming and taking over the Capitol, and everyone just standing by chilling. But also, at the same time, people fighting for their ability to exist, being tear gassed, maced, beat, etc. Can you explain to us, because I don't think there's a way to make it clear than what we demanded this summer, and why is it that we are still seeing these challenges? And then I'll go to Jessica, and then I'll go back to you, Talina, to round out the discussion.
Thank you. I think one of the things that we fail to realize is that our police, the police department enters our communities, neighborhoods as an occupying force, not as servants of the people there to help provide calm, to provide policing, to solve crimes, but they enter on any occasion as an occupying force. I sent out a video on Thursday, and yes, Yusuf, I believe that policing here in Syracuse and around the country can be changed, but I believe that we cannot allow others like the PBA, those of others to change the narrative, right? I do not believe that there is any sentiment from anyone that did any marching that there is hate for police. There is hate for the actions that take the lives of Black and brown people unjustly and sensefully, but not for police itself. We do see that there needs to be some clear change, which was in those 9 demands that not everybody that was marching agreed to. So I want to be real clear here. The people's demands for policing weren't adapted by everyone that was out there marching. And we want to be real clear on that, because sometimes the narrative gets changed to make it so that things happen that really didn't happen. We believe that policing can be changed in Syracuse if sanctity of life is put first rather than last. Again, I'm so glad that you brought up the insurrection, because we would never get that opportunity to get that far into a building. It was almost like looking over your shoulder to go on the steps of City Hall for the way that we were policed over the summer. Drones in the sky, helicopters, peaceful protest. Met with force in the street. A window was pretended to be more important than the sanctity of life. We watched Stephen Smith with over 40 bullets in a Black body just become this thing where it was described that we were more violent than the actions. I must say that morale is low in the community. For me, I live on a street that was called Murder Ave. It took me from 2008 to last year to get cameras on this street to stop an onslaught of murders. I was myself policed, a police body, right? A well-known community activist that's never been arrested, associated with a murder. Police sent to my home, sent to my job. If I worked anywhere else but what I worked at, I would no longer have a job. And people would have only seen the police coming to my house and she did something rather than I didn't do a thing, wasn't even where I was accused to be, wasn't even explained what I was accused of, had to hire an attorney, had to hire a private investigator. And I'm gonna be honest with you, police chief came to Syracuse, National Action Network of Syracuse, brought him to our meetings, upheld him. PBA came after the chief. We stood there with our chief, right? We stood there as a community to say there will be no attack on anyone's weight, body size, or anything, because I'm one of the smallest people you could ever know. Just to be turned on, not looked at as an ally. So I think that if you really truly want to change policing, you really have to say that you want the community's help and accept it. You cannot have an occupying force come in my neighborhood after a traumatic incident, and you have neighbors' hands, like Talina's hand was up like this, saying, hey, we seen something, and you get cursed out. You get almost arrested because you called for help. So over policing is something as simple as there are no guns, drugs being pulled out, but you get a tank in the neighborhood, as I showed you all on Thursday, in a very small apartment complex with elderly and others there. We get tanks right at the Southwest Community Center, and they don't even get noticed, and our kids are going in and out. And when you ask the question, officer, sergeant, lieutenant, is there something going on that we need to know about? Do we need to stay safe? There's no response. But in other neighborhoods, we get reverse phone calls. It is really hard when you work for the National Action Network, not just the Syracuse chapter, but we are in the middle of a Chauvin trial. We are in the middle right now of having Reverend Al Sharpton in the middle of a convention have to go to Dante Wright's police officers hearing. We are in these places and spaces where we see why morale is low, right? Community morale is low because, I'm gonna be honest with you, we're not good at catching the people that commit the crimes, even when the community stands up, shouts, helps, and then we still get downplayed by police when you go on the news and say no help from the community, right? There is a fact in hand. The morale is low for the police because of the actions that they commit. It has nothing to do with community. If you weren't shooting 13-year-olds, if you weren't loading a body full of bullets to 40 with one individual with a semi-loaded gun, you would not have these conversations around the country. If you weren't allowing insurrectionists to enter a place, I grew up in DC. We were told that this part of the Capitol, if you ever enter, ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, you all know what that sound is. We watch things happen to other groups of people that we're told we would die for. Right? And they go in and they come out and they get arrested. They get taken to McDonald's after they shoot a group of people in a church. And you want us to have understanding. There is a thing that happened in Ferguson that we've been trying to get Mr. Oliver. And if you have a chance, please take a chance and read the Ferguson report. Ferguson happened because there was a sentiment of over-policing in Ferguson. It also happens that we only look at policing of bodies or police bodies as the police pulling us over and profiling us. It comes also with fees, fines, and tickets. Taking a driver's license away for something that it shouldn't be taken away for, of a Black man or a Black woman that's trying to bring a full-time job and money home to their family, ticketing only streets on the south side and not on the north side at the same validity, ticketing one car up to 20 times, even though it's on the other side of the street. And then we have to have video proof. Being on a scene and watching an officer turn off the camera when it should be turned on, trying to have a meeting with the police department, and we're being told that we're wrong for asking for change, right? That can never happen again. I believe that the sanctity of life is the responsibility of the police department to uphold if you're asking the community to uphold it just as well. We can no longer have a double standard, right? Where we have a change in the law like 50A and we still here in our town cannot get any records from the police department, even on officers that we know have raped and pillaged people. We have our chief saying, he's not like that around us. What mess is that? Where else do you get that from? We have to stop it and identify it as a root cause in an institution that doesn't want to change. When the police department clearly wants to see change, the community is there, not to force it, but to help you with the change. As long as we get the pushback and the mischaracterizations from the Police Benevolent Association that makes it seem like peaceful protesters are something more than just that, we will continue to be seen in Syracuse as a police department that is an occupying force, not as a force that wants to prevent crime from happening. They only want to suppress it, which means arrest. I'm sorry. I'm tired of the pressure and the stress on Black bodies. I'm tired of watching people from low income neighborhoods die. I'm tired of them calling Nan and feeling helpless because we can't help the police solve the problem because sometimes they don't seem interested. They have a way of categorizing, as Yusuf said, Black on Black crime. Crime is crime. Crime needs to be solved on the South and West sides with the same aptitude and the same veracity it is on the North side, it is by Carousel Mall, and it is anywhere else in the city. And until we all have that same understanding that crime is crime, no matter where it takes place, it needs to be solved with that equity that Yahkeef, that TJ talked about, we are fooling ourselves. If the Syracuse Police Department wants change, you see a whole onslaught of people that you said you've seen marching in the streets that wanted change. Join up with us because we're not against you. We want to be for you, but we're never going to be for over policing and knocking heads and occupying forces of civilian people that just want to be partnering with
you. Ooh, you know, people, people ask folks to be in collaboration with people, and I think it's important that you collaborate with where you align, right? And it's important to understand that Kyle Rittenhouse, who was the young man who killed an individual in Kenosha, Wisconsin, he is totally fine, and police unions have been funding his campaign, right? His legal fees. And in fact, it was a data breach that revealed that he's getting funded from police officers and police unions who are saying, keep up the good work, we support you. How could we have alignment with someone who is supporting people who are trying to justify our killing? How could you have alignment with folks who continue to justify, as has this current police union, the killing of Black and brown people? You know, Adam Toledo, who was killed by Chicago police this week. You're talking about the morale of police. We Black and brown people have to see another one of our people killed, whose life is snuffed away from them too early. And Twiggy's point about Ferguson, before I go to you, Jessica, because you and Talina are going to really help to bring this out before we go to the focus, the breakout groups to have more robust conversation. Ferguson is important to raise because of the way that the fines and fees funded the city's operations. So you targeted, you deploy police to fund and operate and basically extract money out of poor people. So you're actually criminalizing their poverty that you are forcing them to be in, right? And it doesn't just happen in the community. It happens as early as pre-K and throughout the schools. And you have been an educator, and I know you, so I know the fire with which you stand for your children and for as you say, your babies. But I want you to also help people understand that it's not just police that are policing bodies, right? It is also other actors who are policing bodies. And those actors in the city of Syracuse are school administrators, are school teachers. And I will say, as a person who started his education in Syracuse University School Education, but left the school education under different leadership than I'm certain they have now, I was told you don't want to be a student teacher in the city schools, you want to go to the suburban schools. And I was like, no, I don't. And then I left the school education because I just wasn't interested in that. So can you talk about both like your experience being an educator and that policing of bodies doesn't just exist by police officers, but it's an ecosystem of people who function to help facilitate this maintenance, please?
So first, I think there needs to be a very focused contextualization of what happens in an urban landscape, right? And in a northern landscape. I think that oftentimes, the city of Syracuse and other places, points north, are seen as these oases of liberation and freedom where racism does not exist and where, Black and brown children, are subject to, I guess, the cultural ills that they come with. But I feel like if we understand where we are, and if we understand the ways in which racism operates, and the ways in which this is a national problem, not subjugated to the region of the South or anything below the Mason-Dixon line, but white supremacy lives, operates, and breathes in this northern landscape, we can have a very honest, opening conversation. You know, when we talk about schools, I was an educator in Syracuse City School District for over 10 years. Most of my time was spent at Nottingham High School, but I'm a graduate of Corcoran Senior High School, you know, proud Cougar over here. But what I saw was disheartening. You know, I watched as I tried to have people understand that the one thing that we are going to do always and forever is make sure that all children feel safe when they come to school. And what I mean by safe is that they feel seen, right? Is that they feel supported. That's what I mean by safe. Okay. My room for a lot of children turned into a place where they could cry, a place where they could be vulnerable, a place where they could be themselves, a place where they could succeed. I found myself stepping in between teachers and students who were outright blatantly racist. And in the spirit, if you know me, then you know it became something very different in that moment. It became me protecting a baby with my body. It became me not caring about a job or an occupation, but literally protecting a body because that body belongs to my community. I think what we don't realize, you know, first part is that the amount of Black and brown teachers who are of the community, and I say that very clearly, of the community, do not exist in Syracuse City School District. I was one of 2 social studies teachers that are Black in Syracuse City School District. 1 of 2. I'm gone now. There's 1 at the high school level. The amount of advocacy that I had to do while I was there in Syracuse City School District, not just for the kids at Nottingham, but for the kids at Henniger, for the kids at Fowler, for the kids at Corcoran, for the kids at ITC, was ridiculous. I watch as so many people make fun of what happens in the community. I watched as so many people made fun of Black and brown culture to no avail. I watched as a Blue Lives Matter flag hung inside of Corcoran. I lost my mind. I cried because of the fury that was inside of me. Like, you have to understand, it's not only about what you see happening, it's about the ways in which that it's the lack of care that it's happening. That's the part that gets me, right? So when I have students who literally, you know, go downstairs and they put a sign on this window where this Blue Lives Matter flag was hanging, and a white female teacher calls the police on them so that they can be scared. Again, I lose my mind and I lose all rationale, because later that day, those same boys were put inside of a room with police officers and none of their parents were notified. I was not notified until the next day. You have to understand that the way in which these children are told to be out of the hallway, right, are constantly followed to and from their classrooms, the ways in which, you know, school resource officers walk around the building, or even sentries walk around the building asking children for their passes, asking children where they're supposed to be, not in a way that they care, but as a way to clear the hallway, is ridiculous. You cultivate learners, you cultivate lovers of learning, people who want to become educators by showing them that you care about them. You show them that you have their back. You show them that while I'm here, ain't nothing gonna happen to you. It's gonna happen to me first. Any adult that has a problem with you has a problem with me. And that's not a us versus them. That's just me protecting a baby that I know, and me protecting a mother and a father in the moment where they are not present, and me standing up for them and their children. It's ridiculous the ways in which teachers weaponize police or weaponize discipline. I never kicked a child out of my room. Not once. If you were removed from my room, you were asked to step outside and I was going to come talk to you. And guess what? After we had our little conversation for 2 seconds, you was coming right back in. There is no such thing of kicking you out of a learning environment. Maybe you just need a little bit more love. The way in which teachers are trained right now is not conducive to what these children need. There are so many children, Black, white, brown, who need love, and they don't get that when they go into these classrooms. The mere fact that we're thinking about sending these babies back to school and we're still talking about whether or not police are going to be there instead of how many counselors are going to be there to deal with the fallout of COVID is ridiculous. Get out of my face unless we're having a conversation, a real conversation about what radical education looks like. We're not ready to have that. I saw it with my own eyes. The moment that I started to teach this African American history class in city school district, I watched children become empowered and I watched adults get scared. Because all of a sudden, the children were the ones holding the power. The children were the ones sniffing out, oh, we can change some things if we don't like it. Well, let me see. I had students going to city government and making demands about more Black and brown teachers who come from their community being in front of their classroom. I didn't work at just one high school. I worked at 3 in one day. Not virtually. Got in my car, showed up at one, got in my car, showed up at another, got in my car, and showed up at the third every single day. You mean to tell me that that's not intentional? You tried to wear me out. You didn't succeed on that part. What did succeed was the fact that I began to have thoughts about how Syracuse City School District in particular is not interested in changing how it treats Black and brown children. I stand firm on that one because I have not seen it. I don't care if we're talking about the school board. I don't care if we're talking about principals and administrators. I don't care who we're talking about. There's only a few spaces, and when I say a few spaces, I mean a few spaces where Black and brown children feel safe, seen, and supported. A couple of years ago, we had the state of education for Black and brown children in the city of Syracuse. The response from the community was disgusting. The response from the teachers was disgusting. The fact that they did not show up, that sent a very clear message of how much you support Black and brown children in the city of Syracuse, who make up well over 60% of the population of students in the district. Don't play games. Don't play games. What exists in this northern context is the gaslight. You are made to feel as though you are, everybody on this screen who is a facilitator has been made to feel as if they are crazy, has been made to feel as if they are making something up that does not exist. I am very clear about how racism and white supremacy operates in this northern context. And when I say the northern context, I mean everything above Mexico. Education is not a game. And I want young people to start thinking about changing education. And I will end with this, when COVID happened and I watched schools begin to close, I began to get excited because I saw that as an opportunity. Oh my God, we can redo education. Oh my God, this is the moment, we about to do it. And then everybody said, no, we're gonna do it on a computer. What? Come on now. But you haven't even given these babies the opportunity to reimagine something different. Instead, it's the same old, same old.
Whew. All right. We're actually going to, I've reached out to some of the organizers. We're going to make a friendly amendment. We are going to go to breakout rooms. We're going to do that. And we're going to make sure to spend time for that. This is too rich of a conversation to cut off right now. And I think it would be disrespectful to the issues that we're talking about to necessarily just try to follow a blueprint of a format. Blame me, if anything. And I'm totally okay with that. I'm leaving Syracuse anyway, so I don't mind. There are a few things that you raised, and then I'm going to go to Talina. And then I'm going to ask a question. I want to give Jimmy a chance to also speak, because I think I see you looking like you want to say something, but I could just be misinterpreting your facial reaction. Jessica, you kept saying children. And I just want to appreciate you doing that and being intentional about that, because they're not looked at as children. They're not even looked at as human beings, right? They're looked at as wild animals, right? Who deserve to be treated in the way that they're treated. They deserve to have their arms broken. They deserve to have their, put in a chokehold. They deserve to be thrown against a wall. They deserve everything, because inherently they're animalistic, and therefore that's the only way you can bring them to heal, right? This is why this conversation about police bodies is so important. It's because of the way that we view Black people as needing to be policed, because there's something inherently in us that is animalistic and wild and virulent that has to be controlled. Because without that, we can therefore not be in control of our own selves. We don't have that autonomy. And it snuffs the brilliance in life and beauty out of people from their earliest ages. So I want to thank you for humanizing them and reminding everyone that they're children. And reminding folks that professionals outside of policing weaponize police against children. And you said a phrase that I wrote down: maybe they need a little bit more love. And I just want to thank you for that, because we don't hear that enough. And I know you know that I have a tremendous amount of respect for you, but I really do want to thank you for saying that they just need a little love. And I'll take moderator's preference to say, in prerogative, to provide what is my personal that makes this political for me. Before I go to Talina, my brother was killed to gun violence, drive-by shooting in front of my apartment building. I grew up in Bronx, so Bronx was a war zone. I mean, like, really was a war zone. And anyone that grew up in New York City in the 80s, the 90s, and early 2000s, like, New York City was a war zone in a very different way that I think we talk about Syracuse. And I'm not trying to belittle what's happening in Syracuse. Maybe I don't understand it, but I've never walked down a neighborhood in Syracuse that I didn't feel like okay. I mean, I've lived in lots of parts of Syracuse. I mean, it's just my experience, so I'm not going to say that's fact. But the war zone that was New York City was regular drive-by shootings. Like, drive-by shooting was regular. And not just drive-by shootings, but you couldn't wear color down a certain street. You couldn't walk out of a street with a certain pair of sneakers. It didn't matter. It was dangerous. And my brother was killed in front of my building, and my father died 6 months later. And I was expected to go to school as if nothing happened, right? Like, if the trauma that I experienced was just okay, you should just be, as a 6-year-old, totally fine. And because I had support in my family, I didn't have behavioral episodes. But I think about the children in our community who may not have that support, who watch their friends get murdered, who don't have access to food, who see their young people like them every day being killed and whose life is snuffed out of them. We're all watching this every day. And we're expected to be normal, whatever normal means, and go back into the world as if that doesn't affect us, as if that doesn't impact us. And I think it's absurd to think that anyone is not going to be impacted by that, and that they should just go to school without the resources. And that the response should be, as the district says, you know what? Let us put police in there so that we can then continue to traumatize them, as opposed to providing the types of services they need. So I want to thank you for reminding us that they're children and maybe they just need a little bit of love. But Talina, you want to take a comment? I want to give you a chance to do so. And then I'm going to go to Jimmy. And then we're going to go to the breakout rooms, because I do want to give us a chance to really have community and a safe space to have a conversation. Talina.
So I'll make this really quick. When you talked about the carceral system, I always want to remind us when we think about the intersections of race, disability, and gender, that we think continuously about how the carceral system also mirrors the institutions of people with disabilities. It's very familiar. It's very organized in the same ways in which you don't have a lot of opportunity to do things yourself unless somebody tells you to do them. And we find ourselves when we talk about say her name, or we find ourselves in talking about people who have been killed by the police, that when you really look at it, that their identities haven't always been named, but they have had disabilities. There are many people who have been killed. Sandra Bland had a mental health disability. Freddie Gray had an intellectual disability. Tamir Rice had an intellectual disability. Many of our folks out on the West Coast who were transgender had mental health disabilities, and those was the calls that were made. So I just always want to bring those centered to the group, because just as Jessica pointed out, it is exactly that. They were never met with or engaged with a way in which they were humanized. They were engaged with a dehumanizing organization. And so when you don't see somebody as human, if you don't see somebody as somebody who should be engaged with their rights in the context of what we're talking about, then you can handle them with violence in a way that we want to talk about changing. So when I think about community engagement in this moment, because right, that's part of the conversation that we were happening, how can we continue to bring those stories to the center? And so just really quickly, Jessica, you had me writing down notes. I was like, schools are acting in loco parentis. So even though they're home now, right? And I'm sitting next to my son all day long, acting as his one-to-one. When we were sending him to school, you were, as a school district, engaging in loco parentis. So you were supposed to be acting as his parent. So you were supposed to be doing the best things possible. And the idea that you are so committed to SROs, and every time they did something wrong would be like, every time he did something wrong, I would be calling the police on him in my household. Yesterday, my mother called me and she said, he's naked. When he was walking past me, I started with that earlier. It's like, oh, he's out of dress code, so I'm gonna call the police on him right now. Like, that's when we think about how schools function, this is the kind of like basic 101s that we're talking about. The other thing is, how do we support those who support our children? Because like you, Jessica, there are so many folks who want to go into education or who might come out of teacher prep programs, get into school districts, and then no longer want to serve our children. Not because they don't want to serve our children, but because they see the harm that's happening to children and see the effects of this idea of criminalization around children, and they can't maintain the frame. So we lose many good people who could be doing better by our students, but they can't stay in that system because literally for their own preservation of mental health, they can't stay. And I think we would be doing our disservice to be on a Syracuse University Lender Center cause sponsored by School of Ed and not name the fact that we are not talking about our Black and brown teachers who are coming through the School of Education, who may or may not have support if there's not somebody like a Dr. Haddix, but she can't literally support every single Black and brown teacher who is in the space. So what do we think about when we are saying allyship, and how are we thinking about other professors and professional development when you go into these spaces? Like, what can they do? And then how do you bring the community inside of schools? Because the truth is that there are so many community organizations who want to assist. And given the policies and practices that are currently in place, you won't even let them come in through the door. You don't want to pay them. You don't want to have certain people in there because of politics and antics. But those are the kinds of people who actually do the loving on kids outside of spaces. Also, last but not least, because I won't drag it, Yusuf, the schools are places of community. So there should never be a locked door when we think about school buildings. We should be thinking about school buildings as this place of love. So at 6 o'clock, if somebody has an organization that they want to run, why can't they use this giant school building, this giant high school, to create that space for children in the neighborhood for the school that they want? So when I say reimagine, it's not imagining, because I think, truth be told, it is a reimagining, because we need to think about schools differently. We've been talking about the same school system for 100 years that was based off of farmers' time. That's why school ends at 3 o'clock, because people used to have to go out to the fields, because we put children in factories 100 years ago. So when we think about it, like when we're talking about even police bodies, even SROs and all of that good stuff, one, they shouldn't be there, because truth be told, like you said, Jessica, if we was loving on children, if we made children feel like they belonged, if we were engaging children in the things that they were interested in, we wouldn't even see the behaviors that we do. And even if we did, we would have responses to them, because we would have connections to families and other professionals to be able to respond differently. Like you said, counselors, the folks who should be in schools, and invest those things. That's why when we say defund the police, that's what we mean. Like, at the end of the day, you want to invest in SROs. Meanwhile, we can't find a counselor to help my niece get into high school, because she got, what, out of 1,200 kids, there's 400 trying to get into college. You know what I'm saying? Like, who is that one person supposed to help? And so these are the kinds of things that we're talking about. There's fundamental policies and practices in place that could be changed, and that the community has already talked about. So when we talk about community engagement, I think it would be well worth the effort of the Syracuse Police Department, which I don't think should exist, but I would love an opportunity for the community to continue to talk about. So what happens if you're a victim of domestic violence and you want somebody to receive justice? What does that look like, right? What does that look like if somebody robbed your house? Like, so what does that look like? If the police are not there, what does the rest of the justice society look like? Like, but we don't never have enough time, because all of these other things are continuously encroaching upon us. And so we don't never really have time to think outside the box. And that's just I think that's the most disheartening moment for me, is that we could really reimagine dope things in a different outcome, and We don't have time because we are continuously being oppressed.
And indeed, we did spark a survey of community members, and we have a robust response rate where we ask people to reimagine, right? Like we ask people and then say, where do you want the money to go to, right? The city could have done this, but they didn't do that. The city had ample opportunity to take the research of young people, of best practices, and implement them. The city could have done almost similar to what Ithaca did, but we really just put lipstick on a pig and called it, beauty queen. And I'm not Kermit the Frog, but I'm not kissing Miss Piggy. I don't care how dolled up she might be, but I'm not with it. And so that's what we're expected. And the insult, actually, and I'm being explicit because it's an insult, is that we're all just supposed to pretend as if we don't know that what they presented wasn't worth the paper that it was printed on. It's just an insult. So I do want to give a rapid fire chance, like Jimmy will go first, then Twiggy, Larry, then TJ, you'll be the last person. Really 1 minute before we go to breakout rooms. But if all of you, Jimmy, you can talk any way that you want because I think you should deserve some prerogative. But the elephant in the room is that Syracuse University is an important institutional actor and has tremendous, I think, as you said in the beginning, have a responsibility or has to bear responsibility. Kendall, you said that. And I just spoke about, and Talina spoke to, and peripherally Jessica spoke to the challenges with Black people in Syracuse University with wanting to have access to these communities and are being pushed back and denied, in fact, dealing with our own institutional white supremacy culture. But as an important institutional actor, Syracuse University also has a responsibility. And this is one group within Syracuse University taking that responsibility and trying to bear witness. But what is the role that Syracuse University can play in facilitating some outcomes? So Jimmy, that's not the question for you. You can respond to anything you want because I think it's fair to give you that a chance to do so. But everyone else really respond and quickly rapid fire. Really mean it, like minute max to like, how do we go beyond, and what does concrete action look like inclusive of Syracuse University's responsibility? So we'll do Jimmy, then we'll do Larry, Twiggy, and then TJ, you'll be the last one.
All right, I'll make this quick. First and foremost, Jessica, Elliott, you are what I had when I was in school. You articulated what teachers did for us on a daily basis. I went to school in the 80s. We had strong African-American leadership in my school. And I had teachers who looked like me in my school. I had teachers who lived, when I walked out of my doors on Sabine Street, if I went to the left, the person who taught me how to swim lived 2 houses down from me and continues to be at my elementary school and continues to live on Sabine Street. If I walked out of my house and went to my right, my 2nd grade teacher lived there. She also worked at Southwest Community Center as a lifeguard. Our kids need to see what possibility is. I hear you, Twiggy, about what our police department needs to do. I hear what our schools needs to do. And that's why I'm here. Born and bred in the city of Syracuse, someone who has done some good work in the city of Syracuse, who can be in different rooms and have different conversations with folks that you're talking about here. But now how do we move forward and start building these relationships with our community and with our police and with our youth? And that's what we're going to try to do. That's what I've been tasked to do. My 3 or 4 months on the job, I probably met with over 1,000 different people, and not just on Zoom, because what I was taught, working for the Boys and Girls Clubs, in the early 2000s and the early 90s is you go meet people where they are. You sit in people's, living rooms and have conversations with them. And you fully listen to them. That's what my teachers did. When I was getting in trouble in school, my teachers walked from Delaware School to Sabine and sat down with my mom. They didn't talk down to my mom. They talked to my mom, talked about what my possibility was if I did X, Y, and Z. I will tell you that I had police officers in my school who were my DARE officers, who I had good experiences with, who were walking the beat in my community. So I saw them on a regular basis. When I was in middle school, at Levy Middle School in the 90s, when it's predominantly kids whose parents worked at Syracuse University, we had officers in our school. Officer Houtman, who was our biggest champion, who was also African-American police officer, who went to the schools at Nottingham and around and encouraged us to be the best that we can be. When I think of my high school, Henniger High School, and I'm a proud Black Knight, I had Officer Curtis Page, who was African-American, who was in our school. I also had Italians, Officer Saturno, who I had good relationships. And I also worked for the Syracuse City School District as a teaching assistant at Fraser Middle School and at Dr. Weeks Elementary School. And we had officers like Officer Gino Toro, Officer Tim Dietz, who were invested in what our kids were doing, whether it was in National Honor Society, whether it was in a baseball game or a soccer game, or talking to their parents. That's what we need to get back to. And that's what I'm trying to do, talking to our law enforcement here, our district attorneys, our sheriff's department, our probation department, the NAACP, the New American Forum. There's a variety of different people that it really cannot be the burden of City Hall. It can't be the burden of just the police department. We as a community need to come together. If we're saying that these are things that are important and we've been constantly talking about them, here's an opportunity as the first time director of community engagement is to get together and come up with a plan that we can execute tomorrow if we had to. How can we start moving from us being hurt and upset to now starting to make some of those intentional changes that I hear a lot of folks on this call talking about? And Boys and Girls, I love Boys and Girls Club till I die. I love the mission. I love the values. They gave me my first job when I dropped out of Casanova College to work with teenagers in 2003. And I tell you, Syracuse University was one of our big partners back then. Professor Copeland, he had a book back then called 10 Things Employers Want You to Learn in College. He brought his students down to the Boys and Girls Club and went through those different skills that employers wanted you to have. We had job training. We had parent engagement meetings. Nothing that I'm going to implement in this community engagement that I had not done, or my teachers or principals, they did it 20 years ago and it was effective. We're not creating the wheel. Yeah, the police activity / athletic league. Yeah, it's not just sports, it's mentorship. It's exposure to people that our young folks don't get an opportunity to see on a regular basis, such as the district attorney's office. Put our folks in front of these individuals so that if they begin to get in a tough situation that parents may not be able to get them, or uncle or whomever, maybe if they build a relationship with the district attorney's office, and the district attorney's office builds a relationship with that young person, when they come in front of them, oh, I remember you were in this program. That's what Boys and Girls Clubs did when I first started. We put our young people in front of the folks who can make decisions, who can make choices. And sports is it. Kids love sports, but that's the carrot. But once they get into it, we put them in skills for success. We put them in job ready. We take them to Washington, D.C. We take them to Minneapolis, Minnesota. And some of these kids were the first time they've ever been on an airplane ride. But I tell you, those are the same kids that I worked with 20 years ago who come from tough areas, graduated from the city of Syracuse. First ones to graduate from high school in their family, first to go off to college. They're in the city of Syracuse right now and don't nobody know them, but you will know them because they're going to be on our board for, the Police Athletics / Activities League. They're doing important work in this community, and they're going to understand what our young people are going through, and they're going to help them figure out ways to get out of it and give them options. We can and argue, fuss, but let's get to what Jessica is talking about. That, yeah, they need love. They need intentional love. They need caring adults, meeting with them every single day. We need to be checking on our students, making sure they get a C or better average in math, English, science, and social studies. We need to make sure they're going to school 96% of the time. And we need to make sure they have folks like Jessica who are meeting with them an hour a week, checking on those things and picking up the phone, talking to their parents saying, hey, how may I help you? Because, at the end of the day, I hear this too, it's got to be on the parents. It's got to be on the parents. But what if you as a parent have tried everything that you've done in your toolbox and you're at wit's end? And I come to you and tell you that I don't know what else to do. Are you willing to step up and say, I know someone over here in youth services. I know someone who's a counselor that can help you. I know how to get you a job, because that's what my teachers did for me. My mom didn't have a job. They helped my mom get a job at the school. And that's what I've tried to do my whole career, whether it was here in Syracuse, trying to put our young people and our community and our families in positions where we're going to give them a hand up, not a handout. And that's what the department that I'm creating from nothing, I'm trying to do. I'm trying to meet community, whoever want to sit and talk to me, whoever want to give me ideas. I've taken notes this whole time because I want this department of director of community engagement to be the best that we can be, and that we can hold, again, folks who have the power to make or fund their feet to accountable. And that's what it's, that's what it's about. That's why I'm here. Because people did that for me. My mother died when I was 15 years old from breast cancer. Never met my father. Grew up on the west side, south side, east side, north side, moved 30 times. And people say, how did you make it? Because of my principals at Delaware School, because of my baseball coaches, because of my friends' parents, because of my friends' older brothers and sisters. And two, they loved me and they wanted to make sure that I didn't end up in a jail cell. And when I was acting up, they pulled me aside and told me to get my act together, not in those words. And they showed that tough love. And not just to me, but other kids, they can tell you stories about that. I am passionate about everything that everybody's saying here. And I think it's important. And we need to work together to make sure those things continue to happen. Our kids need it. They should not be picking up guns, killing anybody, whether they're white, black, brown, yellow, in between. They shouldn't be doing that. And like I said in the interview, enough is enough. And we as a community need to hold each other accountable for that. And that's what someone mentioned, I think it was Talia earlier. We have to be willing to stand for what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. Because truth be told, a lot of white folks helped me, a lot of black people helped me, a lot of Latino people helped me, a lot of Asian people helped me. It wasn't just one demographic. And so that's why I can go in a room and put myself in folks' shoes and understand what they're saying and listen. And because of my training, and then leaving, the same stuff we're fighting for right now, and I'll leave it at this, is what we were fighting in Virginia and Lynchburg. Black students can't take advanced classes. Black students are being suspended more than ever. Black students are being told that, you know, white teachers are afraid of them. So you know what we created? An equity task force. And it was a group of individuals from the community, and we tackled those with the superintendent, the chief of police, other organizations in our community to keep that in front of folks. Here in up Syracuse, we had Black history, we celebrated all of that. But down in Virginia, you can't necessarily do that, because you have to be understanding that there may be other cultures who may be offended from that and may challenge you and say, why is that happening over celebrating Jewish or, you know, the Indian culture? We had to look at it in different perspectives. But also what we did, because we talk about poverty, right? Syracuse is 93%, you know, poverty in certain areas, 89%. Lynchburg, Virginia, we're at 25% kids in poverty. What the mayor, the vice mayor, and the city manager made, their state of the city was like, we're gonna move families from poverty to progress. What does that look like? We're bringing the rich, we're bringing medium income, and we're bringing folks who don't have it in the same room, and we're gonna break out into groups and come up with solutions on how to do that. Whether it's transportation, whether it's food deserts, whether it's education, all those things were on the table, and we came up with a plan to do those things. And that's what it sounds like we need to do here. Because truth be told again, we don't have a lot of grocery stores in our neighborhood. You know, we had Save a Lot on the West. Sorry.
I don't want to. I don't want to interrupt you. I do want to.
I just want.
Listen. You're passionate, and I feel the passion, and I think it's important to honor the passion, and to honor everyone's passion. And I want to apologize as the moderator that we won't go into. It's not. No, that's not your fault. It's my fault because I let people keep going, and I think it's important. I do want to make 2 points before I go to Larry and then Twiggy. We're really going to do rapid fire, and then how about we do this as opposed to going to the breakout groups? We'll have a raise hand function if you want to engage in the conversation. We'll do that. I want to say, Jimmy, thank you for your comments. One thing I'll say is, would love as a part of the 16, 20, maybe 20 organizations that actually developed a plan that have a series of demands, that have written legislation, that have literally written policy. We haven't had the invitation, but we would love the opportunity to meet with you. We actually don't even have to think about what to do because we actually did it. You know, we literally have the thing ready. We can give it to you right now if you want. But wanted to just say that. I also I wanted to say a part of the problem that we do have is budgets are limited to finances. And because we spend so much money on policing, we don't have the money to go to other stuff that you talked about. So imagine for a moment that instead of that being a police officer that we're hiring, that it was your friend's parent, right? Imagine if it was someone's aunt or someone's uncle. Imagine if it were a Miss Twiggy or a TJ or a Cliff Ryan or a Hassan Stevens or an Evan or the very many other multiracial other community members that could be a part of this, as opposed to paying $90,000 in pensions for the rest of people's lives to take their money to suburban communities and never invest in the city of Syracuse to the tune of $50 to $60 million per year. I think that's what we're really trying to get at, not window dressing the status quo, but actually shifting us to a different reality. So Larry,
can I just say one more?
You got 30 seconds really and then I'll go to Larry.
It'll be really quick. Is the police department, and again, I've only been here 4 months, but the folks that I have been in contact with, I've sat down with the PBA president my first week, you know, the first week he was hired. and talked about the vision of what this department is going to be like under me. He was open to it. We've been in constant communication, trying to figure out ways to get officers interacting with the community in a different light, okay? Officers in the department are willing to do the same thing. And I just, and I get what's happening nationally, and it trickles down to Syracuse, but our police officers too are human beings just like our community are human beings. And we have to begin to start building a intentional relationship that I hear folks saying that they want to do, and coming to the table with respect for each other. And I'm not saying one or the, I'm saying both entities. And if we can do that, we can start doing some of the things that we're asking, because there are a lot of folks who want to do things, not just SPD, state police, sheriff's department, and other entities that that I read or heard that we have some disagreement with. They're willing to try it, and they're listening. And I'm in between, and I got to listen to both, and I'm going to advocate for both, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. I will believe it when I see it. Just my 16-year history tells me contrary. And I'll also say, after having sat on the governor's executive 203 task force in Syracuse, and none of them people have any interest in doing half the things we're talking about. I think it's important for us to talk about what we are agreeing to do, and I am not agreeing to continue to oppress my people. That's a non-negotiable. Mr. Williams, I want to give you a chance to be able to respond. I'm sorry to have to limit you. I think you had the least amount of time today, but if you can just briefly in a minute, and Twiggy 1 minute, and then TJ 1 minute, and then we'll open up for conversation with folks before we go. You're muted, brother.
I apologize. I'd like to ask the gentleman of Mr. Yusuf, could I yield 2 seconds back of my time for which I was muted?
Absolutely.
So very quickly, first of all, Mr. Oliver, congratulations on your appointment, and I really, applaud you. I think we ought to be proud of our Syracusans. I do echo the sentiments of Yusuf, just to make it short. We have to be careful about what we overpromise and then underperform. Oftentimes we become the face, right? And behind the scenes, I like to say that all the things that you espouse, that Jessica espoused, our children are not deserving. It is their right to have that. So it's not an afterthought. It is their right to have those things. They're born as citizens. We're not born into slavery. And so we're born into systems where we should be expecting the full brevity of equality as anybody else. And I do say, again, I appreciate Yusuf's comments on, sometimes when you've been around, it's sort of like wait and see. Been there, done that. And again, I think we do need to be intentional. We do need to continually to work with our stakeholders in hopes, right? And dream of that, building that process. Because if we're not at the table, then we're on the menu, and we understand that. So we have to really understand that we need to be at the table. Glad that you're there, because oftentimes you can't be there unless you get the invite. So I appreciate the fact that you're there, so the rest of us can be invited. And I would say that there is already sort of, as Yusuf has said, some things that I think the groups have already presented. Maybe it's an opportunity not to reinvent, but to revisit, so that we can start from there, and then you may be the person to do that. Quickly, Syracuse University is a wonderful institution. Been here since the 1800s. I think they are part of the public trust. And again, same thing for Syracuse University, is sometimes distinguishing what we're doing through those schools to build credit, or what we're doing through those schools to build intentionality to see a community grow. They are the core of a brain trust. That's our intellectual trust that we have there. And, I'm glad that we have, ongoing partnerships with particularly certain schools. But again, we have to also be careful, because as Yusuf has said, how intentional is it if we're going through teacher programs, but yet the same people that are there to teach us about education are the same ones that are saying, you don't want to go to those particular schools. So it's kind of like we have to constantly be engaging. If we all basically just followed what Ms. Haddix has done over the years, almost single-handedly, and looking at how to build a conduit to a meaningful literacy and education and reading program. If Syracuse University School of Education just took 1/10 of that, we could certainly be making an impact and a difference within our school system. So I would say that Syracuse University constantly has to check its intentionality about the difference and distinction between building opportunities for students or really building students into opportunities to create not just a background for credit, but also bringing that brain trust and building a community so the community can grow and enrich itself. And that's basically all I have to say.
Thank you very much. I thought you said you were around in the 1800s. I was like, well, Black really don't crack. But you meant Syracuse University was around since the 1800s. So I apologize. Like, woo, that brother, that's some good DNA.
Yeah, I look good for my age, huh?
Hey, listen, man. I'm just trying to be you when I grow up. Twiggy, Jessica, and TJ, you will be the last 3 people. We really do want to try to give no more than a minute, 2 minutes each.
So I want to thank you all. And I know you mentioned solutions. And I just want to say that not only were the 9 demands that Spark, and Nan is a founding member of Spark, put forth, they were actually solutions to problems that people are already expressing. So at any time the police department wants to sit down, or anyone wants to sit down with Spark or Nan to discuss those solutions to the problems that already exist, we have been willing and ready to meet and work with folks. The same resolve haven't been afforded to Spark 315 or the 14 to 15 organizations that make us up. Not Again SU, Theta Tau, the general body were all things that we were able to see, not because we wanted to see, but they were pointed out, the difference in the way that Black and brown bodies are treated at SU than the way that they are than their white counterparts. We also had to see through the connective corridor, which we still call the unconnective corridor, that Black and brown bodies aren't treated the same when they're trying to access the bus and get back and forth. We've had a meeting with the chancellor 2 years ago, and we seem not to be able to get a meeting back with the chancellor. So if you want to be open and affirming and transparent, then you have to meet with the community. We believe that there should be a youth NAN chapter on SU, an NAACP chapter should be reinvigorated. So when students go through those things, as Laura Lynch said, that needed to be changed. We recognized early on there were disparities on Black bodies at SU, no differently than the disparities on Black bodies living in the city. The one thing that we do know that when a Black body is caught at SU, they are locked out, and sometimes they have to call those of us that live in the community to provide them with the comfort, the home, the protection. We also realize that programs like the Syracuse Challenge that would lower the grade point average of a student being able to go to SU because they've attended the Syracuse City School District will create a bond and a network of seeing that they're nurturing and wanting people from the community. I'll close by saying that the Brooklyn Center in Minnesota is no different than Syracuse City Police Department because no officer lives in the city that they serve. Right? So unless that becomes something that we really want to work out so that we can understand the ethnic backgrounds of different diverse groups that make up a neighborhood or a community, we're still not willing to get to it, right? We still have a problem with Asian hate, with Black hate, with LGBTQ hate, with trans women hate, and we're not willing to do anything but sit in small rooms and have small conversations about them. When the police department is ready, when SU is ready, we as the community are ready to take this out, because when we think of criminalization or police Black bodies, I don't think that we're thinking of 8-year-old Josiah who was at a school and his school teacher criminalized him and then brought the police officer in to criminalize him over something his daddy did. An 8-year-old is not responsible for the problems of the family.
The child shall not take the burden of the father. I'm Muslim, but I'm told that's a phrase from the Bible. Jessica, and then TJ to round us out.
Thank you guys for doing this. To really try to help people understand how large this thing is. I'm a native of Syracuse. I hold a master's degree from Syracuse University. I am finishing up my doctorate at Syracuse University. Um, Within my department, I will be probably, yep, the first African American person to receive a doctorate in the Department of History at Syracuse University. Really? Really?
1800s.
Really? Like you really? 1800s? Really? You know, this isn't a game, it's not a joke. You know, oftentimes it's the town, right? Syracuse, and then it's the gown, Syracuse University. The gown never wants to get dirty because the gown never wants to invite the black, the brown from the community into its space. It's really funny to listen to people have conversation about creating spaces for Black students on Syracuse University's campus when the Black people who live in the city of Syracuse are not invited, not allowed, and not welcomed on Syracuse University's campus. When Not Again SU happened, I found myself caught in the middle because of all of the things that were happening within my community and all of the things that were happening in Syracuse University's community. I don't choose. I don't choose. I don't choose to be a student first, even though I've worked my ass off for this degree. Push comes to shove, if you know me, I leave it where it's at. It's not a game, it's not a joke with me. My people will always be first. The safety of my people will always be first. The freedom of my people will always be first. I can't be bought, I can't be bullied, I can't be none of that. I'm just a little bit bigger than Twiggy. But I come with all of the fire, right? Because I literally stand on those who have come before me. I really am my ancestors. I really am. And I carry that torch forward. Come hell, come high water, it doesn't matter with me. Black people will be free. Period.
Well, TJ, good luck with trying to follow that one.
Yeah, so in terms of what specific things we can do, right? So here's a few. I did like a brief list. So one, the city is finishing their budget proposal. The Common Council should halt that until it reflects transformative efforts in both policing and equity. So we know, so we see actually a tangible change in Syracuse. That's first, right? And that can still be halted. That can still be stopped right now, right? And so, and second of all, the people's agenda needs to be fully implemented. It is a plan that was done with research. It was presented almost a year ago now, and they've had it. The Common Council had it. The mayors had it. SPDs had it. They've all had it. And while they've done some of the things requested, they have not done all of them. And it really was the biggest, most transformational pieces have not been done yet, right? So that's something that can happen right now, right? Third, organizations should challenge the mayor's office and the Common Council and say, oh, let us reevaluate our relationship, given that we know they're not doing transformational things that will result in a tangible difference. And even within the next month, within the next year, within the next 5 years. What else? Okay, so also organizations should reevaluate and honestly just cut off their relationship with SPD if possible. If possible, there are certain organizations it's a little tricky, but like if possible, because if you say you're an ally to Black and brown people in this community, then you would say, I don't want to use what has historically only ever been a weapon against Black and brown people in this community. I don't want to fund them. I don't want to hire them as extra security for my events, because what am I saying to the Black and brown people who I say, hey, I want y'all to come, but also I'm inviting the people I know y'all saw kill somebody for 8 minutes, and we're still sitting here just trying to figure out if they're going to face any justice for it. So that's another thing you can do. In addition to that, you can, for individuals, you can join, support, and uplift the individuals and organizations and grassroots organizations that are actually doing this work, doing this research, doing this advocacy to ensure that Syracuse is safer. What else? Okay, there's a lot of candidates running in this new election. You need to challenge every single one of them on what they've done historically, that they can say and clearly communicate with evidence it has actually improved the conditions for Black and brown people in this Syracuse. Not, oh, I did a program. How did your program help Black and brown people? Not how you think it helped. What evidence can you show that it actually helped these people, right? And then, in addition to that, challenge them by saying, anything that you are proposing you have to have evidence with it, and you have to clearly communicate and show how it is anything different than what we currently have right now. And you can tell, because if you look at it and you say, I'm not interested in none of this, then it's nothing different. Because transformative policy looks transformative. It looks like something you haven't seen someone do in Syracuse yet. It looks radically different. It's not going to look the same. It's not going to look like what we saw from past politicians and elected officials or people running. You will see it and instantly be like, oh, wow, this is something different. I've never seen a candidate propose something like this. And I think that's everything I have on my list.
And folks can go to spark315.org. That's spark, SPAARC, 315.org, and you can find the People's 9 Demands with the research and everything that's associated and affiliated with it. I don't have the option to see the hand raised feature, but if folks, we're going to be in community here, right? So if you got a question, and I want to set this up because we have about 10, maybe 15 minutes left. This is a safe space. You can say how you feel, you can express your position. You are totally welcome to do so. That does not mean you will not be challenged. So I just want to be clear that just because you got the chance to say how you feel, you should say that. And we respect and uplift that, but also respect and uplift that you might be also challenged. So with that, if anyone wants to partake in this conversation, I see Evan has his hand up.
Oh, I didn't think I was going first. Thank you so much. I was, my heart was really heavy after yesterday's panels. So coming in today, this morning, so early to go into this conversation, I just didn't know how I was going to feel. So I just want to thank you all for creating this loving space, this very challenging, loving space, because it's needed. It needs to be said. It needs to be heard from every single stakeholder in the city if we want the city to be different. I wanted to talk to Jimmy's point about how we reach out to community. And I want to make it very clear that we should not be putting that labor on our Black and brown bodies to be going out and actively trying to get police officers of the department to listen to us. My question in return would be like, what's community service on that side of the fence? How are they coming into our communities and building those relationships and not giving that labor like to us? That's where it needs to start. We don't need to be doing any more of that leg work right there. And I say that to SU too. If we're taking up space in our communities, we're literally taking up physical space in our communities. And we have some of the best programs, some of the best thinkers living in this city, but we have a city that does not statistically match up. Like we do not need to be passive. We don't need to take up any more space. And we need to figure out how we as institutions are going to build those relationships with the people who need it most. And I'll just leave it with that. So thank y'all so much for today. Yeah.
Jimmy, if you want to take about 30 seconds to respond, and if others have a question they want to ask, please do raise your hand, and the event host will let me know who those are.
Work in progress.
Okay. Any other questions? Any of the other panelists want to respond to that question?
I mean, I can make a comment. I definitely don't. I don't subscribe to the notion that a way to a better relationship with the SPD and just police in general is like through just this kind of intention around community building and trying to have this kind of bipartisan, we both come to the table thing. Because at the end of the day, if one group is publicly executing another group, there is no way ever that you can expect the group that is being publicly executed to say, hey, I want to come and I want to bring y'all to the table and I want to heal this relationship when there's no mutual contract between us. If me as a civilian does anything, I can list off the people and list off exactly how long I'll go to jail, exactly how long it'll take for me to be arrested. But if then the officer does something to me, I mean, it'll be a decades. We'll still be like, hey, is the officer going to get charged? Are you going to be, you're going to be saying, justice for me and all this stuff. So I'm like, there's no way any type of community building, any relationship can improve until the two people are under the same, these eight groups are under the same idea that we're coming here with a mutual understanding that we are agreeing to the same rules. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. No cookouts ain't going to do that. No programs ain't going to do that. No come in, hey, I'm hanging with you. Because at any time you decide I did something wrong, you want to execute me on the spot, it will be years and we'll still be talking about, and y'all gonna get justice for me. So there's no community building without that. First, that accountability piece. And not just on an individual level, but systematically, institutionally demonstrating that. Applying it into law, not just at the whim of whoever just happens to be in charge at the time. So
yeah, it's hard to ask folks, and then Talina and then Twiggy, it's hard to ask folks to sit with folk when there's a kind of direct defense when they extrajudicially kill people, right? Like when there's a sense that like we all seen on a video that an officer pulls someone out of their car and punched them in their face because their music was so loud, and there's a defense for that behavior. I can't I don't know what we can agree on. I don't know how we should come to the table when you punched my brother in the face and tried to tell me I didn't see what I saw, right? Or justify when the city's top lawyer justifies an officer to put a 15-year-old in a chokehold and they lose consciousness and then say, well, wrong place, wrong time. Now, I don't know how we could really come to the table, and I think it's kind of unfair. And I dare say actually disrespectful. I don't mean that you mean to be disrespectful, Jimmy. I know that's not your intent. But I think there's a lot of deep learning that has to happen about how the institution has plagued Black people before we ask them to show up to the table. Y'all get y'all stuff in order, and while y'all doing that, we need the money to get out of y'all hands and into our communities. Talina, and then Twiggy.
So, Yahkeef, you definitely hit the nail on the head, but I'm gonna say to folks like Jimmy and the folks like other people, Dr. Haddix, I said, you're so dope. And I'm thinking about folks like Decca, I'm thinking about folks like Twiggy, I'm thinking about folks like yourself, Yusuf, like Jessica, even you standing in the gap, right? In these places in which you're the only ones. And this language of diversity, equity, and inclusion work that's happening, even though we're talking about policing, we often still put the onus on our bodies, right? And we take up the burden still, even though we're part of the marginalized people that we're very much talking about. You're still talking about mental health. You don't know who has a disability, people with disabilities who are in the center of the disabilities rights movement and still have to take it on as both Black and brown and disabled and still have to carry this burden. For me, just brings up the answer to this question is just like, why do we continue to have to always be at the center when truth be told that other people can pick up this cause? Like, at this point, you should just know. Like, we don't have to do it by ourselves. We just don't want you to do it wrong. But the issue with the police department, and I think this is the struggle, Jimmy, that I had with your response, was that at the end of the day, it still puts the onus on Black and brown families as to already assume that they're knowing. And we don't often know where to go. If you can't call someone like a Twiggy Billue, if you can't call someone like a Yusuf, if you can't call Mr. Williams or say, Yahkeef, I know you doing BLM, or Jessica, can you tell me where to go? Or, like, then the burden is still on you, and you still have to figure out how to navigate systems. So at some point, when do we ask the systems to be responsive versus Black and brown families continuing to have the onus placed on them? The systems can just be responsive. They have enough data to know at this point in time what is happening. We know it. It's like when Sharon Contreras was here under on SCSD. Like, at the end of the day, we looked around and we knew, like, the numbers are here. We don't have to figure this out anymore. Like, what do you do now? What's the next step? And I think that's the answer for me. Like, honestly, it's the struggle that I had with the content. Is that, like Yahkeef said, I don't want to come to the table with you. All I want you to do is do what you're supposed to do, and please be justice oriented. And if you could do that, that already should be in your mission. And honestly, the reason why people are asking the defunding of the police is because the current carceral system is not justice oriented.
Yeah, and even when you come to the table, you may not be invited back to the table, right? So we've actually come to the table. Unfortunately, that table went viral to 16 million views, and we haven't been brought back to the table despite continuously asking to come back to the table. Rich has a question, and he's going to be the last question, and I want to give Twiggy the chance to respond, but I just want Rich to ask his question, and then you can also respond to what you want to say, and then Rich's comment, and then I think that's the conversation. Rich?
Boy, there's just a lot to process. So I'm not from the Syracuse area. I'm not from New York. I'm actually located in Maryland. It's not a local conversation. It's a nationwide conversation that you all are having, and it's affecting all of us. How do we bring accountability to the implementation of these plans? And how do we make sure that they happen consistently and with fidelity throughout the life cycle, or whatever we discuss is a way forward? And I'll just leave it with that.
Thank you, Rich. I'm actually moving to Maryland. Actually, literally right after this call, I'm going to Baltimore. So I'm actually behind on my schedule, but it's my fault because I talk too much. So hopefully we'll build community together. Twiggy, if you don't mind answering the question that you were going to answer, but also if you could please attempt to answer this question as well. And others, briefly, we're really at time, but we want to give a chance to honor the question.
Definitely. I think those of us that used to live in the DMV, I'm from DC, right? Lived in Maryland and in Virginia, see some things a little bit differently than others might. Sometimes we look at things the way we want to see them, which would make my neighborhood a very nice neighborhood. That's the way I want to see it. But the way that it really is I live on Murder Ave. That's the nickname of my street. It's Murder Ave. But I can make it seem a different way if I want to, right? I can make it seem like we're not really allies when we really are. So I want to just look at the context of what we're saying around solutions. And I would say to anybody, I agree with TJ. I don't want to be brought back to the table again to rediscuss those things that I discussed and that we've discussed since. I mentioned to you when I got on this call, since Officer Kluge broke that girl's nose at Corcoran in 2008, we've been working on police reform in schools, right? And listening to our young folks say what their interactions are like. And then we even go out and we get the best practices and we bring in people from around the country with best practices and we challenge the suspension ratio and they say that we can't count. And then we hire somebody and they come in and say they count very well. And we put out the best practices and the solutions to the problem in front of us. And our city, government, and school districts ignore us. Right. We've not only given the Ferguson report, we gave the mayor's office just 2 days ago. I sent it back out. I send it out every spring since 2008. It's spring again. The mayor's office to reduce gun violence because of these things that's happening in the neighborhoods that's taking on these interactions with our children, right? And it takes 4 years sometimes for someone to read a document that the community, as Yusuf said, as TJ have said, have really bright minds, expert minds looking into this. It's harnessed by the largest police organization in the country called the Department of Justice. And we can't even get the Syracuse Police Department, Onondaga County Sheriffs to look at it, right? Profiling is really real. And one of the solutions to profiling was that we start to do these things together with police. But as long as you come in, I think that's what TJ said, with the same mindset that I'm going in to work in criminalistic neighborhoods, I'm going in to work with criminalistic children because their father might have been something, our mindset could change. But what's doing that for the institution? I love Jimmy Oliver, right? Everybody knows the way I feel. If you know me and Jimmy, you know I love Jimmy Oliver, right? But I had concern for him going into the police department because I know the way Black bodies are treated and I know what kind of man he is, right? So it wasn't any concern about him being able to deliver. It's the way that our police department would treat his Black body. Last thing I'm going to say is I'm getting really tired of trying to teach white people how to treat my Black body. It's not my responsibility as a human being or any Black human being to teach anyone how to respect a Black body. That comes with your morals and your values. So that's how we begin to see how implicit bias begins to sit in. When those questions are asked, we definitely know why they're being asked. I'll also close with the SROs in school, no differently than some of the teachers. I know you all seen the viral No Lives Matters. And I work with a group of youth. All of us on here work with youth in some capacity, right? But when you work with youth, they come to your job every day and they see the very teachers they trust. They think they trust. Jimmy, they think they trust these teachers because these teachers have hugged them, have put some love on them with a No Lives Matter shirt on in the middle of what we're going through with George Floyd. Imagine the drain on the psyche that has. If I, as an adult, can't understand how to process or to do with it, what we think our kids are doing with this. So I would ask that before you ask us for another solution, right, that you look at some of the solutions that we've already put on the table. There's 9 demands. Each demand comes with a solution. It's not work for you to do. We've done all the work. So when you look at it that way, I don't want to come to the table anymore and do any more talking. I want to get our solutions on the ground, get them started, and one by one, see if they work. See, the thing that I believe that we don't do well in Syracuse is that we don't take the good and we don't mimic it, right? We take the good, it stays here for a minute, we let it go, and then we try to create something new. Not what does always work. Right? We don't replicate bodies of good officers like Officer Black and Officer Nicastro. We don't do that, right? We keep them in the corner and we hide them, similar to the way that all that is said about the Syracuse City School District is the bad things instead of we had an astronaut, right? We have an astronaut, a Black astronaut that our school districts produce. We're producing award-winning, Academy Award-winning students, but that's not what the emphasis is on. So when you really want to start talking about solutions and not clearing the table of what will actually work and saying, hey, let's think about something different, then we can talk. Other than that, it's a bunch of fluff from our city.
I think with that, we're at time. Rich, to answer your question in the way that we have in our space in Syracuse that could be done in Maryland or anywhere around the country, people are talking about public ownership over policing. They're not talking about letting a chief of police talk about discipline, because that system hasn't worked. It's not going to work. And that can look like a citizens review board or a police accountability board, but you actually reduce trust in those institutions when they make recommendations for discipline that aren't implemented. When an investigation goes through and they say, yes, an officer has a sustained finding and that officer isn't held accountable, then you're never going to get people to trust the police or the institution. In fact, it, in some respects, can erode trust in the actual police accountability board or the citizens review board, because it doesn't have, as colloquially people refer to, the teeth. And so justice and accountability is devoid and absent. But justice and accountability are also beyond that. It's about ensuring that when you are a corporation counsel, that you're not going tooth and nail to fight for a police officer to beat someone up. Why is my taxpayer dollars going towards ensuring that a police officer can whoop my ass? That don't make no sense. And if you're a mayor of a city and that's what your corporation counsel is doing, then you ought to fire them. Mayor Walsh ought to fire his corporation counsel. I said it, I'll say it again. What it looks like are district attorneys doing like the district attorney in Baltimore City, who is saying, you know what, we're not gonna, and especially in COVID, we're not gonna prosecute quality of life issues. Like, for instance, people who are stealing Lunchables because they don't got food. They don't have food. So you're gonna put them in jail, in prison? No, like, we're not gonna criminalize the consumption and sale of marijuana because we've funded historically the dehumanization, the incarceration, the isolation of students, and suspended them in so many ways that we funnel them to the drug trade and then are going to incarcerate them for the thing that we only give them the option to do. Where did that work at? So we can't continue to prosecute those types of cases. We need a new prosecutorial process. In fact, we probably should just dismantle the entire institution to start over again. So there are lots of different options that we can explore. That could be an entire discussion for today. I gave you 3 of them. I hope that's useful and instructive, but it is super, super important to understand that the power should be centered in the people, and that what it ought to look like is, and I know that this video has gone viral, and I think it's gone viral for the wrong reason. What it was about was a lesson in democracy. That's what that was. This was to remind all of us that they work for us. We don't work for them. We pay them. They're called public servants because they're supposed to serve the public. You as the public have a right and they have a responsibility to hear your grievance. And we have gotten to a scenario where they are telling us what we ought to be organizing our lives around. And that is not what it should be. I study, and that's my education is in public administration and political science. That is not what the social contract is about. That is not what it ought to look like. And we need to have a fundamental shift in accepting that as normative. And that is a part of what the process looks like. And if they don't do it, then get their asses out of there. They got to go. If you can't do the job, then find somebody else who got to do it. You got to go. And I don't mean that sarcastically. If you're not up for the challenge, you might be a nice person. I'm sure we could have coffee someday. You just can't be the mayor. You can't be on the common council. You can't be school board president. You can't be superintendent. You can be something else, and I'm sure you do a damn good job at that other thing. But this ain't the job for you, buddy. There's a lot of other people who are here to do the work. And if you ain't ready to do the work that you signed up to do, not to make everybody happy, not to be everyone's friend, not to sit on 2 sides of the fence, but to do the job, then get out the seat and let somebody else do it. With that, I want to turn it over to the organizers of this really important event.
Yusuf, thank you. And thank you so much to all of the panelists. This was such an important and necessary conversation, so much so we revamped the entire program on the fly because this conversation needed to be had. And I'm just very grateful. I'm grateful to call Syracuse my home and to be in community with all of you. And Yusuf, I'm so sad that you're going to Maryland, but as I text you last night, I'm like, that's just down the street. So we know that you are always doing the work, but also in solidarity with us here. So just very grateful. I want to thank everyone. We want to thank everyone who has been with us for the past 2 days, here with us in this conversation this morning. There were a couple of questions in the chat around is this recorded? Was yesterday recorded? It is, so please continue to follow the Linder Center for Social Justice. We will make information available for everyone as it becomes available. I want to say thank you again to the panelists today, to all of our speakers from yesterday, the moderators. This was just a really insightful conversation and event. We want to thank the planning team. So many people were involved in bringing this together. You all know who you are. Thank you. The technical support, the Linder Center, the Center for Disability and Inclusion, the Landscape on Urban Education lecture series, the School of Education. This truly was a collaborative partnership. And so we're really grateful for the opportunity. There's so many people in this Zoom room, many people who are, on the ground doing the work here in Syracuse and then also around the country. So we just want to honor you and your work and your labor. As Kendall, my colleague, stated at the beginning, we bear witness. There are people bearing witness to people losing their lives. Like, we cannot wait. This is not something that we have the privilege to just say, this was just a conversation and now we go on. I think the panelists pointed out so clearly today, the information is there, the knowledge is there, the data points are there, the evidence is there, the solutions are there. We don't need to continue to rehash that. People are not asking to come to the table. So if you are bearing witness and you're taking responsibility, now is the time for you to sit with for a moment, but don't sit for long. But sit with for a moment. What am I going to do? What is the action? What is the change? What is the transformation? So don't just, reflect, don't just take all of this in, but really think about the action. Because if you know what you know, and if you're watching and experiencing what many of us in Black and Brown communities are experiencing on a daily basis, this cannot wait. We don't have that luxury. And I just want to close also with just emphasizing what was just said around the pain and the trauma of seeing and witnessing police bodies, of being a policed body. That over the next week, the next many months, we are living in dangerous times. There's so much that is happening. And I just invite and ask that you all honor yourselves, take care of yourselves, knowing that the breath and our very existence is resistance. Rest is our birthright. So please rest, drink water, love on yourselves, love on your loved ones. Embrace joy, even though we're living with pain and trauma and witnessing violence. As Black folks, we know we've always found ways to embrace joy. So please continue to do that. And with that, I honor all of you. I appreciate all of the work and look forward to the next Linder conversation. And I know there are several of my SU colleagues were on this call. We have been given a charge. So I think, as SU, we got to decide, are we in the work or aren't we? Those are the options. Hey, Talina, I see you, baby. All right, thanks everyone. Please take care, enjoy the rest of your Saturday.